Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
You silence the doubters. You get the best tools. You work with the right people. You look to the future and bust through.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today we have the amazing Gerry Friesen returning again. How are you, Gerry?
I'm well, Tracy, and thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
I'm always excited when you can join us. Great conversation, and I'm sure maybe somewhere we'll have a quote. One or two quotes we'll share because you're the quote king and I'm the quote queen. So
I forgot. I should have memorized a few.
I know, that's putting me on the spot. I don't have any ready. Welcome back. We're so happy to have you. On the show right now, we are diving deep into transition planning. And over the last month, we've been setting the stage on different key principles and a foundation for transition planning. Now we're moving into communication, and that is why I am so happy to have you on the show as part of this series, because as we all know, when we are in business and then in business with family and then throw in transition planning, stakes are high, communication needs to be clear, and conflict can happen. So we are going to dive into this episode titled When Conflict Happens. So before we do that, do you want to tell our audience a little bit about you again?
Well, thanks, Tracy. I guess, and so we kind of joked about this before we started, that I kind of do almost anything, and maybe that's a little broad, but I guess in my day job, what I do, Tracy, is I do mediation, conflict management work. Sometimes, of course, it's coaching. So that's what I do. I've done a lot of farm debt mediation work, dealt with over 600 farm families in that area, dealt with other families that are in transition, are having conflict. And so I kind of do that. And then, of course, during the winter, also, I do a lot of stress management work. I do a presentation. I call myself, as you know, Tracy, I call myself the recovering farmer. I used to farm, don't anymore, but still have a passion for mental health and agriculture.
I love it. Such wisdom around these topics. So I'm excited to dive right in. Why don't we start with what is conflict? And I know even myself, I always think conflict is bad. So I want you to take it from there, chat a little bit about conflict, and set the stage for our conversation that's about to happen.
You know, I find it very interesting, Tracy, that you said you find conflict bad. I actually do too. I sometimes wonder how I can be a mediator because I hate conflict. But you know, in the bigger picture, when we talk about families, and I've got grown kids of my own now, starting in on grandkids and the conflict that can bring. But you know, there's an interesting dynamic when you talk about parents and their kids. And so, of course, kids are brought into this world. They grow up. While they're growing up, parents, of course, are trying to train them. Parents have a certain amount of control, and sometimes they wish they had more. Other times they probably use their control a little bit too much. But of course they want their children to grow up. They want them to survive, not only survive, but thrive. And so here's your first quote, actually. What I often find interesting, and I saw this on a wall in a farmhouse, in fact, where it said, it's difficult to give kids roots and wings. So you want them rooted, but you also want them to have the ability to fly and to be their own person. So what happens is, so that there's that dynamic as they're growing up, and as they become adults, young adults, late teens, wherever that may start, and there's a transition that's supposed to happen into the farm, for example, that dynamic has to change. And so that's an incredible change that both the children and the parents have to go through, because you're now not only are you transitioning a business, you're also transitioning a relationship from parents, kids, to actually being farm partners, farm owners, whatever that may look like.
I don't have children, but I can imagine how hard it would be as a parent to adapt and change and respect and change your role. Because I know even I'm the oldest cousin out of like 40 cousins on one side, and I am the oldest sibling. And it's really hard to see your siblings, your cousins, your children as who they are in that moment, and not if you were the parent, the kid that you brought up. It's hard to take somebody serious at a level that you're at as peers, business partners, right?
Yep.
So
yep.
I could see where that would really get in the way in farm families, right? Because parents want to treat their kids like kids forever. And kids don't want to be treated like kids forever, right?
Exactly. And you know what? It's interesting, Tracy. Actually, this morning, I was building a deck with two of my kids, my two sons. And even there, and I often tell farm families, when I sit down with them, I say to them, you know what, I'll be honest with you. I could never be in business with any of my kids. Mm-hmm. And that's not saying anything bad about my kids. It's not saying anything bad about me. It's just simply a reality that I don't have to face it because it's never been an issue. But I understand just in a small deck building project, I can see where those two, and we're going to get into this later, generational differences, different ideas, different concepts come into play. And so for the old man in the situation to just sit back and go, well, yeah, okay, go ahead. It's difficult.
Well, yeah. And the one thing I find too, the traits that it takes to be a successful farmer or an entrepreneur or a business person is independence, a strong backbone, probably strong will. All those traits I find are great because they make you successful and make you strive and make you achieve and make it happen. But now those same traits, if you can't work with yourself, those are traits that if you were bringing in the next generation and you weren't aware of that, those traits are going to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And so back to your comment about you not liking conflict, I find it interesting because I've asked groups in the past when I've done workshops with them on conflict, I'll ask them to name a metaphor for conflict. And you get two completely opposing sides. You know, there's one group that will say it's a game, it's an adventure, an active nature, a garden, quilt making. You know, they look at it as something like that, whereas the others look at it more as it's a storm, it's explosive, it's a trial. And so you have these two completely different approaches to conflict.
Interesting.
And I farmed together with a brother for 25 years. And I think it's safe to say I was the type of person that hated conflict. I thought conflict was negative. I thought conflict was just arguing and nobody winning and hard feelings after. Whereas my brother to this day enjoys conflict. Like he will. My wife actually accuses me of starting conflict, but I don't think I do it as much as he does. And it's just the different approach people have to conflict. And I hope that's a point I can really get across today, Tracy, is not, we have a tendency when we're in conflict, we look at the other person and what the other person is doing wrong, and if only they would listen to me, then things would be better, right? And I think the point I'd like to make today is instead of looking at other people, instead of being judgmental, look inward. Look at what you are doing, what you are contributing to the conflict, what you're contributing to the atmosphere. And so when we start looking inward, things will change.
Love it. You have what you call the 5 conflict styles. Did you want to go there?
Yeah, I guess research in essence has shown that people basically have one of 5 conflict management styles. There first and foremost is avoidance, and someone like you or like me, if we hate conflict, we're going to avoid it, right? Others are accommodating, or they accommodate other people so they don't have to get into disagreement. Someone, again, and I'll refer to my brother, who was more the competitive type, so there's a competitive type. If you plot this on a graph, it's, are we more focused on relationships or more focused on winning? And so, and ultimately what we want, so there was avoidance, accommodation, there's competition, there's and collaboration, which is the middle one. Cooperation is I'm getting them mixed up. Cooperation is the middle one, where you try and cooperate, but if you collaborate, and that's the important one, because that way you're looking at conflict, or you're looking at what's being disagreed upon as something where through collaboration, through talking about things, you can actually both win, but also keep the relationship intact.
Okay, love it.
You know, I love using the example now, although the pandemic is a bad thing. I love using the example of when these vaccines that are being produced now were in the development stage. Like, it wasn't one person that developed this. So I suspect there have been countless meetings by countless scientists and doctors and other people in rooms to figure out how to produce this vaccine. Now, if they're all going to avoid, or most of them would avoid the conflict, you're not going to get the best product out of this. But if you put your heads together and you can talk about these things and collaborate, then you come up with the best product possible. And so that's what we want in a transition plan. That's what we want in a family business, is to ensure that all the participants collaborate, that they talk to each other. And so when we come to conflict, very often when I sit down with people, regardless of what conflict is involved, I will say to them, before we do anything else, we need to establish that at this starting right now, it's not about who's right and who's wrong. Rather, it's to build understanding. So if you and I disagree, what's my point? What's my position? Why do I feel the way I do? Why do you feel the way you do? And very often conflict is based on perception, right? And so I may perceive something different than you, but if we actually sit down and talk about things, and I become vulnerable, I share with you, you share with me, we can I can go, oh, that's why you're saying what you're saying. Right? And when we build that understanding, we empower people to participate more and to be able to collaborate and make conflict something that can be positive rather than negative.
I find communication and conflict and people one of the greatest mysteries and opportunities. And even myself, I have two sisters, and often we're not a conflicted family. Actually, we don't avoid it. We just don't fight. There's not much to fight about, thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
So, but even sometimes you sit down and you listen to them talk, and we're three sisters raised by the same parents around the same time, right? We're all close in age. And you go, where did you come from? Like, who are you? And how am I even related to you? Now, here's the fun thing. I don't farm with those sisters. Now, if I farmed with those siblings, holy smokes. Now that's where it would get a little juicy, right? And it's so hard too, like you said, with perspective. We're in our world reacting to life based on our life experience and what we think happened. Yeah. And the other one that we're talking to, they're doing the same thing, right? And we can often be in two different worlds. And then we're so wrapped up in our mind, and then we get our back up against the wall because we think they're doing this is an art. And to be able to take this skill into a farm family and a farm family business and just go, okay, cool the guns here, cool the guns. Now, why are they thinking that? I'm not going to get I'm not going to get defensive. My perspective on this is I'm going to listen to you, right? But that is challenging stuff, to be honest.
Well, and you know what? You used the word defensive.
Yes.
And we very easily, when we're faced with something, we very easily become defensive. And I like the definition I sometimes use when it says, defensiveness happens when we are presented with an unbearable idea. And very often that unbearable idea is something that we take as a personal affront to ourselves. So there again is we have this tendency to quickly become defensive, which just escalates the conflict again. But back to your other point about you and your sister, again, looking at my own kids, we have 3 kids and they were born in a fairly short time period. And so we have the first one and everything is good, right? And you go, oh, this is easy peasy.
Yeah.
The next one comes along. You treat that one the same way, you kind of have the same expectations, and all of a sudden you go, holy Toledo, they're 2 different people. In spite of having the same parents, they are different. The third one comes along, and in our case it was 2 boys and then a girl. Well, now you have something completely different again, and so you have to understand, and this is the same as in partnerships and when farms transition, you have to understand that each of us is our own person. We all have different conflict management styles, and we also have different communication styles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that stuff is gold too. You know, Gerry, I'm going to do a little riff here, a little beef I have. I sure wish, and maybe it's different in school systems nowadays. I'm not one to blame, but I sure wish that the school system would teach a little more of this stuff, like conflict management, like communication styles. To me, being able to be in relationships and work with people are the most important thing in life. Everything else takes a backbench, because if you can't work with people, you're not going to get very far. And to me, I don't remember learning much of this. But anyways, there's my little beef. And teachers are amazing. Yes, don't get me wrong. I just sure wish that we were all equipped a little bit more with this information as a foundation in life, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I sometimes sit back and obviously when I get involved with families, very often they've already got significant conflict happening. But I'm sometimes also, and there may be those that don't like when I say this because perhaps they focus on it more than I think, but what I sense is very often transition planning focuses on equity retention and financing and how will the parents retire and that kind of stuff. But not enough focus on what you just said about teaching this in school is on relationships. We make certain assumptions that, okay, so now we're getting to the point where I want to transition the farm to my kids and don't look at the relationship part of it as much as they should.
Yeah. We could open it up for worms. Right? That's my little riff, my little beef.
Yeah.
I can't help but wonder how much easier life would be if we were equipped with this knowledge from a young age versus if you actually, I'm interested in psychology and communication, kind of had to go there for work to be successful, growing a company, managing my team. I had to go there to improve my skills, but I sure wish we could all learn communication and life 101. And I mean, how much better would we be? Anyways, I don't have time to revamp the school system today, so we better carry on. Okay, so you chatted about conflict management styles, perspective. Did you want to say anything more about that before we move?
Well, I think just on that piece, Tracy, what often happens is when I get involved with families, of course, they may be in the middle of a big fight. Actually, sometimes they're not. I dealt with a family about a year ago. Father and 2 sons came and sat at my kitchen table, and we met and we started talking, and I was sitting there trying to figure out why they actually wanted my involvement. They seemed to be communicating well. There wasn't any tension in the room. But then what happens is when you start opening up the Pandora's box, as it were, you find out that there's a lot of things that were never talked about, and which now that they feel they're in a safe place to talk about them, these things start ending up on the table, right? And so often my job turns into more of a coaching job than a mediating job, because I meet with them individually and really explore their assumptions, explore their expectations, and really do a reality check on them. You know, when a son says to me, for example, well, my dad's just running an old combine, or he's running 2 old combines, and if we would just spend whatever they cost these days, which is a lot, if we would just buy one new one, then everything would work. Well, okay, is that reality, right? And so on the other side, when father says, well, no, I don't trust him to manage, you know, that kind of stuff, it's a matter of doing a reality check. I find it interesting when a father says to me, and I was told this last summer, there's obviously, and it's interesting, I'm going to digress here, but we talk about transition planning, and sometimes when I get involved with families, there's no transition planning going on. It almost feels like a hostile takeover by the kids. But when the kids say, well, when we take over, I don't want dad looking over my shoulder. And dad sits at my kitchen table and says, well, of course I'm going to look over their shoulder. Can't I? And you say, well, did you like it when your dad looked over your shoulder? No, but that was different. No, it wasn't. It was the same thing, right? So, yeah, it boils down to, it certainly boils down to a communication thing, and starting this sooner rather than later, because again, all the assumptions that have been made.
I would like to be a fly on the wall in a room where you're doing mediation work. That is a skill set, and that's amazing that you could do that. You have to have a calm, I could just imagine how calm and precise, and like you said, it's going to be coaching when you're, a lot of times, right? That's quite the skill set to be able to stay calm and help lead people through that. Kudos to you, Gerry.
Well, and I'm going to talk about this later, but you know how much easier it is helping other people solve their problems than it is solving your own?
Sure enough.
And so that's the reality of it. Now, having said that, I sometimes jokingly say that all my stress in life from the work I do manifests itself in road rage, because I have to be on my best behavior when I deal with people. So when I leave a meeting and I get in my car, I'll look out, right?
You got to funnel energy somewhere, right?
Before I get home.
True.
Yes.
Yeah. Smart man. Okay, so.
And sorry, I'm gonna jump to the next, and that's where we talk about the 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Excellent.
And it's work that Patrick Lencioni does, and he actually writes a really good book on this. And so I often view relationships, whether it's couples, whether it's families, any other type of relationship, I view that as a team, right? And so Patrick Lencioni says that if you have a basis of trust, or you have to build your team on a basis of trust, because if we don't trust each other when we're working together, we're not going to have, and his second one is conflict. If we have a deep valued trust of each other, we're going to be able to have positive conflict, so that we can actually make things better, right? And so if we're arguing about combines, it's because we trust each other, we can have the conversation to collaborate like we talked about before. And so when we can do that, that then eventually brings us to the success that we're looking for. And again, when I deal with families that are in conflict, I would suggest to you 9 times out of 10, that trust has been destroyed. And if you're not on a basis of trust, you will never be able to get better till you get that trust back.
Yikes. How that, I hear you. Yeah, that's tough. That's tough.
And so it's again, and we hear this a lot, and maybe people get sick of the word vulnerable, but we have to become vulnerable, because when we are vulnerable, we can show that trust. We can have that conflict and be positive about the outcome, and then there's accountability, and eventually we get results out of that.
Yeah, there's so much to that process, isn't there? And I know a lot of farm families, and I know personalities. And again, if we're not brought up openly communicating, like many of the farm families I know,
yeah,
there's areas you don't go.
Yeah.
It's just, wow.
Yeah.
Communication. Okay, sorry, Gerry.
No.
I liked it.
Communication, but can we talk about generational differences first?
Yes.
And that plays a much bigger role. In fact, I've been looking into it more and more over the last year or two, and it plays a much bigger role than I had ever thought it would. And that is, again, generations are different. And it was like the conversation I had with my two sons this morning. We were sitting in my son's house and the grandkids were there and something was going on. And I kind of made the comment, well, you know what, when you guys were growing up, I handled that differently, right? And they kind of look at me and go, well, yeah, but you didn't do it right. You know, and so I instantly, back to being defensive, I felt disrespected. And yet then we talked about it, and I said, you know, you've just brought up an interesting point for me, because generations are different. And so when my sons or my daughter do something that I would have done different, I become defensive and I feel disrespected. Mm-hmm. When in fact, after we talked about it this morning, you kind of sit back and go, yeah, you're right. I did things one way. I did things differently than my parents did, and now my kids are doing things differently than I did. Doesn't mean they disrespect me. It's just a different viewpoint. It's different values. They look through the world through a different lens. And so that's something we have to learn to appreciate.
Well, and you know, the generations too, I look at my grandparents, to my parents, to us, to the next generation coming up. All of us have lived through dramatically different worlds. And I look at the grandparents and the ones that probably, for the most part, can hold farm property still, like my grandfather. Communication? What? Like, what? Sorry, I don't have anything else to say. And that's, I mean, I usually don't get very personal, but he owned the farm and he was going to farm until he died, or chose to give it over to somebody. And he went till that son was probably about 50 some years old and decided how it was going to go from there without consent of anybody, and didn't communicate anything. And the individual's 50 years old already. So communication, and I mean, that's personality types, but I'd almost venture to guess, looking at all the farmers I know in previous generations, that kind of open communication wasn't a thing in the ones I know anyways, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so if there's no communication, what do? We make assumptions.
Right.
I had a call not that long ago from a fella that was, I believe he was getting to be near 60 years old. He had farmed together with his father since he had been young. Through the years, the father had bought land, the son had bought the equipment. Here they were, he was 60 years old, and now his dad wanted to transition the farm, and he was going to split the land between all the siblings. And the land was worth a lot and the equipment was run down. And I said, did you never talk about, what the plan would? No, they hadn't. They had all made assumptions.
Yeah.
And so that's, like you say, that's when you run into trouble.
So we talk about generational differences. You've given some examples. How do we deal with that? Because that's a very real thing. And I'm going to say almost on all farm operations, in my experience, I got to preface that. All the farm operations that I know, there's big generational differences and communication differences. So how, if somebody's sitting in our audience going, yeah, I'd love to talk about it, I don't have a problem, or I'm a little nervous, but I'm okay bringing it up, but my dad or my grandpa can't communicate.
And again, and we've talked about this before, Tracy, people need to seek the help of someone that can provide that safe area, that safe zone to talk about it, and know that when they open their mouth, the father or the son or the daughter, whoever it may be, isn't going to jump down your throat, right? And that's where questions are so important. I often use the term turn judgment to curiosity. In workplace conflict, we often use this. And so if the example you just gave of someone that would really like to start talking about this, how can they broach that subject, is turn it to curiosity. So if you and I are the ones that where I would like to approach you about something, I come to you and I'd say, you know what, Tracy, there's something that I'd really like to talk to you about. I am curious why you did this or did that. And I'd just like you to know that it makes me feel small, or it makes me feel diminished, or it makes me feel disrespected. I'm just wondering if we can talk about it.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, to again, I can't say the phrase often enough, turn judgment to curiosity, because that's the key. Because as long as we're all sitting around the table, whoever's in conflict, and we're being judgmental, we won't solve anything. We're not going to start communicating any better than we did, which got us into trouble in the first place.
Well, I love how you said curiosity, because that changes the tone, and it goes from being aggressive to, when you said that, that just kind of dropped my defenses. Instead of, I don't understand why you don't do this or why you don't talk about it. I'm curious about what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah.
And I can be, by nature, I'm actually a very direct person. I don't seek conflict prior to what we were talking about before, but I'm smart enough to know what's the end game, right? I don't want conflict.
Yeah.
But even myself and my directness, naturally who I am, I could probably come off as very direct, sharp. I like that, where you go, I'm curious what you're thinking. The curious just changes it. I love that. I really do.
Absolutely. It changes. It sucks the tension right out of the room, really.
Yeah.
And then the second piece to that, though, too, is you have to be very careful you don't use you statements. So I'm curious about why this happened and it made me feel. Use I statements. So it's not, because as soon as you start using you statements, the other person starts feeling judged again.
Oh, yes, I did that. Right? I said, I'm curious why you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I may have said the same thing before, because depending, of course, on what the conflict is, right?
That's excellent. And look at just that little tip there that you gave us. I am wondering why you do this, Gerry. And again, I'm using a sharp tone there, but Gerry, I'm wondering why you do this or act this way versus.
Well, and I go,
yeah, right away.
What do you mean?
Cards up.
What did I do?
Yeah.
Right.
Gerry, I'm curious what your thoughts are on transitioning the farm.
Or the other day when we were talking about the farm transition, Dad, you said that you would let me manage the spraying this year, right? Or suddenly you said you wouldn't and you had in the past. I would just like to understand better why you changed your mind. I'm curious why you changed your mind. Mm-hmm. Instead of going into attack mode and saying, you said I could do this and now you're saying I can't, blah, 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 and the whole thing blows up.
Yeah, that's powerful. Excellent.
And so just on and you wanted quotes, Tracy. On the generational differences one, I read one the other day, and I don't know whether it was a father-son, mother-daughter, mother-son. I have no idea, but the quote simply said, he wants to crawl and I want to run. We have to learn to walk together.
Powerful.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And obviously it was the younger generation in this case that was saying it. And obviously they understood, they had They had the wherewithal to understand what was going on. They had the wherewithal to understand and recognize the differences, and realizing that we're not going to go all the way to this side or all the way to this side. We have to try and find some sort of happy medium here that we can work off of and build off of.
You silence the doubters. You get the best tools. You work with the right people. You look to the future and bust through.
Well, and that's a really big generational difference. Just what you said right there. Also, dealing with family in a farm family business, you're naturally set up with a lot of stumbling blocks to overcome. I could just see it. Now, one, too, is, and I'm stereotyping, but as we get older, even myself, I find my hunger, my desire to grow and take on more debt. I'm not done, but that hunger's curbed a little versus when I was 20, 30s. It's changed. So I can only imagine a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old that's gung-ho, all that energy, talking to somebody that's 60 who is naturally wrapping up the farm and their building phase. They don't, a lot of stereotypes here.
Yeah.
One's thinking of wrapping up and transitioning, hopefully, and the other one's thinking of taking on the world. My gosh, those two right there is a big potential for conflict.
Without question, and I think you made a very key point, Tracy, in that things change as we get older. So if I'm 40 years old and my son is 20 years old and we're talking about the farm and eventually transitioning and what we're going to do with land and equipment, that's the way I feel that day.
Mm.
When I'm 60 years old, 20 years later, suddenly that shifts and I don't feel the same way anymore.
Totally.
And again, but then suddenly when I'm 60 and my son is 40 and he's going, well, Dad, you said this, you said that. It's like, yeah, maybe, but we didn't really discuss it. And again, we went to assumptions.
Yeah.
You heard one thing and you assumed this.
Wow.
Or I heard one thing from you and you assumed this.
That could be a whole can of worms right there too, just as a generational difference, right?
Yeah, I thought about that this morning, actually. Without revealing my age, I'm getting really close to qualifying for the vaccine, put it that way.
Okay.
And I was just thinking this morning, you know what? I'm sitting here doing the work I'm doing. When I look back to when my dad was my age, I would have thought, wow, he's old. He's not going to be working anymore. He'll be retired, right? But things change.
Yeah, totally.
And so again, the communication piece is so incredibly important. And without taking up a lot of time, you know, even the conflict management styles or the communication styles, you can Google them, and you can, you know, there's four different types of communication styles that people have. But the key point in the communication piece, Tracy, and I'll give you an example. As I dealt with a father-son situation a few years ago, and it was high tension. And I met with them. It was at the time when I traveled a lot, so I actually met with them in my hotel room because that was the best meeting place. And so the father sat on the couch. The son sat on one of these hassocks, I think they're called, whatever, and he had his back turned to his dad. They were talking, but he had his back turned. That's how tense the situation was.
Okay.
And so it's not that it's not that their communication was disrespectful, but their body language was. And so yes, and so it's interesting that only 17%, not 17, 7% of our communication is actually verbal. 38% is tone, and 50, whatever is left, 57 or 58% is body language.
Absolutely.
So we may be thinking, you know what, inside I'm seething, I'm angry, but I'm cool. But like you did before, you cross your arms and sit back, or, you try turn and face away, or so we have to be very cognizant, not of just of what we're saying, but also what the tone of our voice is and what our body language is.
I totally believe that. If people, even on the phone, I talk on the phone a lot with clients, and there you don't have the benefit of seeing them. You listen to their words, but you get their tone. And sometimes I found you have great conversations, and if they have a weird tone on wrapping up the call, you're like, wait a minute, right? But it was just a natural closing tone for them. And then you start questioning the whole conversation because the tone changed. It was very chipper and fun, and then they just lost energy at the end, and you're like, wait a minute, was that okay?
Yeah. Well, and again, you make a really good point. When you talk to people, discuss things on the phone with people, all you hear, well, you may hear tone, but all you hear really are the words. And so when people, and in my work, because of the pandemic again, most of my work now is by video conference, but I also do some by teleconference. When I find that when we do it by teleconference, that it's not as easy to reach resolution because there's no accountability for what you're saying. Nobody can see you, so that accountability is lacking. And in fact, I found it interesting last fall in one of the mediations I'm doing, the people wanted it in person. And this room had been set up there was 3 of us in the room. The room had been set up with 3 small tables with plastic shields, plus we were all supposed to wear masks. Well, even that, I said later to them, I said, you know what, even something like Zoom is much more effective because now we're sitting and at least looking at each other. We can see the body language. We can see whether the other person is engaged and to what degree they're engaged.
You could see the face.
Yes.
Or if you hide the mouth, that's a lot of the communication, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting. Okay, communication. So verbal, tone, body language, different personality types too. Actually, as a side note, Gerry, as I can so often do when we have great conversations, we just go on little tangents.
Yeah.
And I love it. But one episode I would really love to do in the future is the different personality types. And again, I think that is a gold mine or a potential volcano. And how often I learned this stuff because of sales. My career took me there, and then I apply it to family relationships with my spouse. I'm very direct. I don't have a problem talking about anything at any time, no matter how heated, right? I try and be emotionally intelligent as much as I can, but my husband does not operate that way. If it is something serious, and I mean, it might be a male-female dynamic there as well, but it's big-time personality types. If I come at him with something where he needs to think, or if it's a big conversation, he's not one to want to respond right there. And I've learned that the hard way because you push him, and then he's not ready for that conversation.
Shuts down.
And he feels attacked. And then guess what? I mean, he's a calm guy, and I love him to death. But that conversation did not achieve what I wanted because I didn't respect his communication style. Now, I kind of say my little tidbit, or I say, I want to talk about this. Let me know when you're ready. Or here's what I think. Let me know your thoughts. And then just leave him. And then he comes back. But how many farm families where the dad, the mom, the sister, the brother, whoever it is, we're totally different personality types, and we don't know that. And we attack. And we're talking about transition now. And then dad's introverted and doesn't like confrontation and so on. And we push and we cause a fight for not being aware of different communication styles, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I said this before, the conflict management styles, the communication styles, and also the one you're talking about, personality styles, the DISC assessment. Yeah, it's so intriguing when you start looking into these things and recognize. And again, like I said, I farmed together for 25 years with a brother. And it's not till later years now, after we were done farming, that I started doing some of this work and looking at some of these things. And all of a sudden I'd have these aha moments going, oh, that's why we couldn't get along there, or that's why we did this, right? Because we were different people. But we never took the time at the outset of this partnership to talk about how we will address conflict when it happens. How will we address things when we disagree? And so when you have an assertive type personality and more of a passive type personality, you know, for a while you can make things work, but eventually, particularly the passive one, will become tired of it and will just simply accommodate or avoid, right? And so as soon as you start doing that, of course, you're not going to be as successful.
Yeah. And that, I mean, I just look at farm families. I know my family's different situations, right? And how often do our emotions run away with us and we are not aware of who we're dealing with, and we handle it wrong and we don't get to where we want to be, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, where do you want to go from here?
Well, I you know what? We could probably spend hours talking about this, Tracy, but I mentioned before the third person approach. And actually someone else suggested to me the other day, they had read in a book years ago that it was the balcony approach, but whichever way you want to use this. And what I've found is, and I said it before, sitting and dealing with a father and son when they're not getting along is quite simple for me, because I am not emotionally tied to that conversation, right?
Yes.
When I'm involved in conflict with my wife or my kids, now I'm emotionally involved and it becomes much more difficult. So what I started doing, and actually at the outset a few years ago when I started doing this intentionally inside my head, was I would, if my wife and I were having an argument, for example, I would say, you know what, I need a timeout. Just like you talked about your husband, right? He needs a timeout, because I needed to think about it and take a view from the outside looking in and going, okay, what am I doing? What am I contributing here? What am I doing wrong? What is she seeing in me? And go, oh, okay, I'm coming across this way. And she's, you know, and I can also analyze what she's doing. But if I remove myself from it and just look, I can go, oh, okay, that's why we're not coming to an understanding. And then you rejoin the conversation and approach it from a different angle. And I've actually gotten to the point where I do that while a conflict is going on. It doesn't matter with whom, whether it's with a sibling, whether it's with my kids, my wife, a friend. I can, while the disagreement or the discussion or the debate is happening, I can sit in the back of my mind and go, well, yeah, you know what, my son is acting a little cocky here, and that's why this isn't really working out, or I'm becoming too defensive, and actually what he's saying makes a lot of sense. So I can do that, you know, aside from the actual debate that's going on, and it makes for a much better communication.
Yeah. Oh, Gerry, you need to train all of us on this. And what a great skill set too. You know, I found from managing my team, when you manage staff, well, just like children or family, you tend to have a lot of situations that come up where people do stuff that they shouldn't, and vice versa. And sometimes some big mistakes. And then it's my business. It costs me money and time and my clients. So naturally you get mad, right? You get upset. You're just, all those emotions go through you. And I finally learned, I said, whoa, the conflict, the mistake has happened. They're going to be sitting there doing their work for a while. I'm here right now. I can't handle this in the best manner that Tracy can, because my heart's pumping. I'm a little French and Irish about it right now. So I'm just going to sit back until all that emotion leaves. And then I'm going to figure out how I want to handle this. And let me tell you, the way I respond to stuff over here, when I do that, totally different than had I done it over here? Because, you know, over here, it's more of a fight or flight, attack, blame, where over here you go, whoa, okay, how did they maybe think that they needed to do that, or that was okay? Oh, geez. And then you just kind of walk it down, you drop the emotion. They know a conversation's coming if it needs to.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to happen in the moment.
Yeah.
My take.
Yeah.
I mean, people can argue and they say you got to deal with conflict in a timely manner. Yeah. But I don't think when people are heated and angry. Anyways, my soapbox is done there, Gerry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's what people need to do. Well, there's 2 points here, actually, Tracy. One is, when I started doing conflict management work 20 years ago, I had this naivety that any conflict could be resolved. Any 2 people could get along if they actually wanted to. I don't believe that as strongly anymore. And when you feel or read information, I just read an article the other day, even can't even remember where it was, that talked about only 3 out of 10 families transition successfully. You know, that's an awfully low number. And so I've sometimes challenged people that they say, but we have to make this work. Dad has to give me the farm, or the son has to do it my way. And I sit there, I go, no, nobody has to. And again, there's assumptions being made. There's the assumption being made that dad wants to transition the farm to me, or mom and dad want to, or the assumption is made that my son and my daughter actually do want a farm. They've never sat down and talked about it. You know, there's assumptions made, and so the kids feel pressured that they should, or the father feels pressured that he should transition to his kids. And my advice to people is, you know what? Sit down and have a conversation without any assumptions, without any expectations, and actually find out what people want, what people in this group here really want. And you're going to be surprised at times at what someone might tell you. And so when you do that, you avoid making decisions and business plans based on assumptions.
What a concept.
Yeah.
Easier said than done, or not? You probably just need to sit down and do it, right?
Yes. And you know what, Tracy? People are concerned, and I think you actually made the comment before that you think conflict is bad, and there's times we avoid it, and sometimes we assume it will be conflict. Mm-hmm. And so we avoid communication or conversation because we're assuming it's going to turn out bad. When in fact, if we would sit down and talk, you might have an aha moment.
Can I give a call out to the stories in our head? You know, sure. I don't find enough people, and I'm okay talking about this because I read a lot about self-help and psychology, and I'm comfortable, and I know we all do it, and sometimes we don't realize. But still to this day, in lack of clear communication, I start assuming things, and I make up stories. And I'm not crazy, guys, I'm not crazy. Well, maybe a little. I'm Tracy crazy, yeah. But you know what? Come on. We all do it. If we don't know what somebody's thinking or the transition, like you've just been saying, the assumption, but sometimes we make up these stories like it's going to be painful or heated or they want this. And then, you know, let me tell you, those stories in your head are often way worse than actually just sitting down and having the conversation. Like there's stories in your head and they're that black cloud. And you finally sit down and you go, okay, this is what's on my heart or my mind. What do you think? You talk it out and you go, oh my gosh, right? Why did I wait so long and build up these stories in my head when I could have just used that uncomfortableness in a different way and said, can we talk about this?
Yeah.
Instead of, I'm going to use all that energy and make up scenarios in my mind, right?
Yeah, exactly. Stew about it for 3 days.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, in a matter of having a 15-minute conversation with the other person, it gets settled just like that. And you're going, yeah, those are 3 days I'll never get back.
3 days or 3 months or 3 years or 30 years in transition planning, right? I know people that don't have hard conversations for a long time. Now, what's weighing on everybody's mind for that period of time? That is a lot of peace of mind that is being lost because we don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations, but yet we're uncomfortable. We're comfortable with being with our uncomfortable stories in our mind, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of my take. Hey, and I know I use myself as my own science lab for learning. And I've been there, right? And so often you build it up in your mind, what's going to happen. And then you do it and you go, that wasn't so bad. And you do that a few times. And then you learn and finally you go, wait a minute. Instead of making those stories, I'm just going straight to the conversation. That I had to give a shout out because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a place for calling out those stories in our mind, right? When it comes to transition planning, because there's a whole lot of those floating around.
Absolutely there is. And in a lot of cases, they built up over many, many years.
Yeah. Gerry,
and so it takes, what's that?
You get me so fired up about this. I love this conversation.
So ultimately what I want to get at with this is that families that want to go into a transition plan at the outset, like I said before, need to focus on relationships. Because quite frankly, if you don't get the relationship piece worked out, and I don't mean, have a big love in, it's rather to we're all going to have roles in this operation. How are we going to get along? How are we going to have family first, business first, right? We can't separate that because we need to have both. And so I tell people, deal with that and document the conflict management plan. Like to me, and I guess it's because of the work I do, to me it's a no-brainer. I heard the other day, and Tracy, I'm sure you've heard this from one of your other guests you've had in the past, is the number was something like if you have a written business plan instead of one just up here, if you have a written business plan, you're 40% more likely to succeed.
Wow.
And I go, if you have a written conflict management plan for your farm and your family, you are going to be 40% more likely to succeed. Wow. I'm convinced of that. Because when you and I have these assessments I give families, and they're short little assessments. Number 1, to look inside to see how you deal with conflict, how you communicate, what kind of personality you have. 1 for the family, how does the family address different issues, and 1 for the business. You do these assessments and you go, oh, okay. And if everybody in the family does these, now you can go, okay, see, here are trigger points, here are sticking points, this is what we need to address. And then what you do is you turn around and it's like in transition planning, you do an exercise on values, you do a exercise on vision, you do an exercise, like you keep going through all these different exercises. I have the same kind of conflict management plan I can give families where they go through different steps. And so now they've got it documented, and 7 years down the road, suddenly something flares up, there's a conflict. And they don't have to sit back and go, oh, how do we deal with this? Because guess what? They open their binder, or they even have it on the wall saying, if this happens, this is how we will respond. Boom, there it is.
Wow.
And nobody has, and in fact, if it's me and you that are in partnership together, Tracy, I don't have to try and convince you that you have it. I don't even have to say a word. I just need to point at it. Guess what? That's what we agreed to. Let's do it.
How powerful.
So if it's documented, it's right there because we all agreed to this.
I always say, I don't think there is enough. I've said it a few times, but I don't think in the business there is enough attention given to, and I don't like this term, to be honest, the soft skills. Because to be completely frank, my life experience and seeing other families I know in transition planning, it sure isn't the crop details, the fertilizer details. any of the hard skills in farming. I mean, we need to do that, master that to have the income coming in. But none of that, well, I shouldn't say that. Usually we're not fighting about that stuff. The hard skills aren't the hard skills. The soft skills, in my opinion, are the ones that change our life, build relationships, and destroy them. And I sure wish we could rename that. It's not soft skills, critical skills.
Exactly, absolutely. And I am, if I had the time, energy, and youth to do this, Tracy, I would do a research project into how conflict, great or small, affects the bottom line of our farm.
Oh,
Because I think absolutely it does. And just one area of farming is marketing, right? And I've talked to you about this in the past, how many different decisions farmers have to make now. And so if you have a team of people on your farm making decisions and they can't collaborate and talk about things, they start making decisions on marketing, which won't necessarily be the best ones they could make.
yeah.
And so now it's cost the farm at the bottom line.
Oh, I agree. I love this stuff. Okay, so conflict management plan. And that's something that you take your clients through, which I mean is amazing. We have crop plans, we have transition plans. Why wouldn't we have a conflict management plan?
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Gerry, you are amazing. I love this stuff.
Well,
so what else?
You know what? I was kind of, that's kind of the last piece I had, is just to challenge people. No, sorry. And I guess, Tracy, and again, back to another conversation we've had in the past, is the importance of, and I want to word this correctly because it can be misconstrued so easily, but to get a professional involved to help you. There is no shame in seeking help. And because that help is something that's going to be worthwhile. And for example, this gentleman that called me, and father, he was 16, the father was older, and he had bought the equipment, the father had bought the land. I told him what I kind of envisioned, my involvement would be. And I said, at the end of the day, it might well cost you $5,000. And he couldn't believe it. And he says, well, we can't spend that kind of money. Well, excuse me, you have a $3 million farm, and you have a conflict issue that's going to have someone lose out big time here, and there's going to be a lot of resentful people involved, and you can't spend $5,000. So people, again, and I think a lot of it has to do with our own selves. Like if I have a conflict with my wife, and she would say, well, we should go see a counselor, my defenses go up because I'm a mediator. We can fix this ourselves, right? But it's not that simple.
No.
And it's no different than, sorry, now you've got me going. It's no different than if you go see a counselor. And trust me, through my stress management stuff, I've told you, Tracy, I've gone to various types of therapy and counselors and what have you.
Yeah.
And as much as I know stuff, going to be able to talk this through with a different person just suddenly releases a whole bunch of new emotions, good emotions, and it's a reality check. So if mom and dad and the boys, or mom and dad and the daughters aren't getting along, and I come and sit down with them at the kitchen table, now suddenly they can start being a little more open because they're in a safe place. And they're verbalizing all of the stuff that a lot of them were afraid to verbalize because they weren't sure what the comeback would be.
Yeah.
And so it's sorry, you get professionals involved to tell you which crops you should spray for what, and what seed you should put in the ground, and where you should market, and everything else. So why are we afraid to get a professional in to help with relationship building?
Gerry, and I always say what we know gets us to this point, right? And if we have not solved it, and I finally got myself in this mind frame, if I've not solved a challenge up until this point, what's going to change 1 year, 5 years from now? I don't have the knowledge or the skill set to get myself from here to here. And what I love about bringing in a third party, one, they're not emotional, they're not involved, it's a safe place. They kind of know how to open that can of worms and help you take them out and place them, and then guide the worms and guide the conversation with a skill set, right? You get some guy off the street in downtown Winnipeg and ask him to go seed your crops. That ain't going to work out well. So why would you expect that somebody that's not a counselor be able to lead an intelligent, potentially combustible family conversation? You need somebody with that skill set. Okay, let's build on that, Susie or Frank, or, it's just, I just see the power, and I wish farm families would do it, because if you sit here and spin as a family and fight and fight and fight because you don't have the knowledge to get you somewhere, what's going to happen? In my opinion,
you're going to spin yourself right into a hole.
Yeah. I love it. Gerry, you get me going. And I kept on asking what else, because I don't want to let you go. I think one day we're going to do our first 2-hour episode together.
Okay. I may have to study for that one.
Oh, no, you've got it all up there. And, I find we always I love this subject. And then you get me going and I get you going, I think. And it's so much fun. So.
Yeah, I enjoy it.
Good. I'm glad to hear. Well, do you want to share any final words, or else I'm going to work to wrap this up?
No, that's fine, Tracy. If people that are watching this are interested in what I do, they can find me at signaturemediation.ca or gerryfriesen.ca, either one, and there's contact information there. They can give me a call, they can get in touch with me and see whether I can be of assistance to them.
Excellent. Thank you for your time, Gerry. I cannot say it enough. I really treasure our conversations and enjoy your wisdom. And I know everybody in the audience feels the same. And if you do, please share it, like it, and get it out there so other farmers can hear this. My mission is to help farmers succeed. And I do believe that is with the soft skills. So conversations like these are so critical to our industry. So share it out.
You betcha.
Okay. Thank you, Gerry. Thank you in the audience.
Always a pleasure, Tracy.
Greatly appreciated. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.
You silence the doubters. You get the best tools. You work with the right people. You look to the future and bust through.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.